Let me speak with you during the next few minutes about the basic technology that we have developed at LexiFi for describing structured products, complex derivatives, more precisely the payoff of these contracts. Of course, if we look at this problem, we may first ask why we could not use an existing standard. And so we observed that despite many tentatives, I would say typically undertaken by exchanges, by professional associations or individual banks, we have not seen any existing standard for describing precisely, exhaustively, completely, in a semantic, well-founded way, the payoff of a contract. We may ask ourselves, what is the challenge? What is the difficulty of that? So, of course, structured products are complex. Their evolution depends on the realization of past observables. They have a long duration. Here in Europe, we see products of 3 years, 4 years of maturity, often 5 years, sometimes 7, even 10 years. So the standard has to last for a long time. The standard has to adapt for changing situations, because a structured product which was much sold in the last 5 years will maybe not be the typical thing that the customer wants tomorrow. We have to adapt to new market situations. So what we see typically is in financial institutions, people working, yes, with a limited staff and with error-prone tools and trying to build up a solution which works well at the beginning but which scales very badly. Often only part of the semantic details of the cash flow are captured, so only a part of the problem is treated, or people are using heavy software systems that need huge investments and huge work to adapt to evolving or new appearing financial contracts. So how does the complexity of these contracts and the often very long maturity of these contracts impact the management of the contracts in a financial institutions? Of course, these contracts, as complex as they are, they must be managed very correctly. Numerous different treatments must be applied to them: pricing, documentation, regulatory treatments, and manipulating not 3, 4, or 5 of these contracts, but thousands of these contracts, even tens of thousands of these contracts, may become a very difficult task in a financial institution. What are the usual classical approaches that we have observed in financial institutions? That are systems that are driven either by some kind of scripts or by some kind of hard-coded extensions for each new financial contract. So a script is typically some kind of code which is implemented by the creator or by the person responsible for managing a financial contract. And it is in some way expressing what is done, what are the features that are realized or the functionalities which are activated during the life cycle of the contract. So what are the problems with these approaches? There are many of them. It's of course a lack of flexibility because it is very difficult and takes much energy to add a new contract or a new structure into this system. The error rates that we have observed are very high, so the operational risk is high because of course everything has to be done again for each new kind of structured product. Scalability is very low or very difficult because things are slow, because you have to redo the work at each time. Maintenance and updates are also very difficult to activate Remember that many of these contracts may last for 7 years, 8 years, so you have to maintain your system over this huge time frame where the contract is active. You often encounter inconsistent interpretations because, of course, the person or the people who have done the scripts 7 years ago are not the same that are doing them today. So they have different styles and they are implementing things in a different way, making also reusability very difficult because code is not designed to be reusable because you add always a new financial contract description, and so integration with third-party software is very, very difficult, if not impossible. We have not often seen such an integration with such kind of system. In a word, we need a much more flexible approach which ensures reliability and, of course, scalability. And so this will drive us to the LexiFi DSL, to the LexiFi domain-specific language for describing contract payoffs that we will speak about now. So we may ask, of course, the question why it is so difficult to develop a generic solution that works for all kinds of structured products. This is, of course, due to the big variability of this market and the huge scope of products that have to be treated, especially if you are looking on all continents in Asia, United States, in Europe, etc. So what we usually see is specific developments that are asking for new enhancements and new developments at each time a new kind of structure emerges or a new usage becomes necessary. So this is, of course, something we want to avoid, and that's the reason why we need a generic approach. LexiFi's goal is therefore to create a description which is both readable by a human being and by a computer or a software program. This description is supposed to describe precisely, perfectly, the rights and obligations which are associated to the holding of one unit of a given contract. The important point is that this description should be sufficiently precise to allow for a big number of applications. Let me cite only, I would say, the quantitative side, pricing, risk analysis, or, as another example, document generation, may it be for regulatory purposes or for marketing purposes. Another use, and probably one of the most difficult to implement usages, is the lifecycle management, ensuring that the contract is correctly managed from its inception to its maturity in such a way that it is always synchronized with reality, and so that all functionalities that I mentioned earlier are always derived from the current contract situations and are therefore, by construction, always correct with respect to the current situation of the contract. Once we agree on the necessity of having such a generic way to describe the payoff of financial contracts, we may ask ourselves, how are we doing this? We decided at LexiFi to create a DSL, a domain-specific language specialized for the description of these contract payoffs, a kind of algebra with a limited number of constructors, about 10 or 12, sufficiently enough to describe any kind of complex payoff. what are the design goals and the design difficulties of such a DSL? In fact, we want to have a language which is rich enough to describe all kinds of payoffs we want to be able to describe, but which should not be richer than necessary, not more complex than necessary, because any superfluous complexity will make any later tools that are manipulating this DSL much more complex. So we have to find the right equilibrium between expressiveness of the language and simplicity of the language, something we needed many years to achieve at LexiFi. Once we have understood and implemented this generic contract description language for payoffs of structured products, we can ask ourselves, what are the real advantages of doing so? How are we differentiating from our competitors? And so, let me here take a simple analogy. If you take some car makers who are offering many different kind of cars, they are always trying to build these cars on a small number of different platforms. So LexiFi made the choice of having only one platform. We put everything on the same language, on the same platform. We have even a dedicated group of engineers inside LexiFi who are only working on enhancing this shared platform. So we are in some kind of way, we are always enhancing our own productivity tool. And so having this unique description which contains all the semantics of the contract, a complete description, allows of course to implement in a completely generic way any functionality that we want to implement. Take as an example quant functionality, pricing. Let's make it simple. So instead of creating pricing functions for any kind of structured products, for an autocall, for a reverse convertible or whatever, we are creating only one pricing function that treats immediately, by definition, all contracts which can be described in the LexiFi solution. Similarly, on the other side, for the input, let's take, for instance, the example where we want to include an external format so that it becomes readable by the LexiFi solution. We will only write one little converter, a system that will take this external description and transform it into our internal unique contract representation. Therefore, a contract that is imported in this way becomes immediately indistinguishable from any other contracts that are manipulated in the LexiFi solution. And it will immediately profit from all the applications and from all the kind of manipulations that we can do with any kind of contracts in the LexiFi solution. Allow me to come back a short moment on lifecycle management of contracts. One should understand that once you have a precise, semantically complete description of the payoff of a contract, lifecycle management derives in a quasi-automatic way from the availability of this description. For instance, future contract events are deduced easily from such a contract description. In the same way, applying a management step, for instance a fixing, you suddenly know a fixing that is necessary for managing this contract, is nothing else than transforming your contract description where you modify, where you replace an unknown by a known value. Therefore, you obtain a new contract description which reflects the resolution of the uncertainty. And this new contract description can itself be again used as an input for all the functionalities I mentioned earlier. You get a system that is by construction compatible and which incorporates in a correct way the life cycle management of all your contracts. We are often asked if we patented or if we intend to patent our approach, and more generally, how we organize the protection of our intellectual property. Our answer is very simple. We are selling an implementation, not an idea. So typically we avoid and we will not patent our approach for two reasons. As said, the first one is that we encourage other players to adopt an approach which is similar to ours. Again, we want to show that we have an implementation, and this implementation is a proof of the correctness of our approach. Second reason we are not protecting in any way our approach is that we don't think that big financial institutions would adopt our approach if it would be protected. We have seen in the past many formats which we have been proposed to use, typically from some exchanges, etc., with relatively precise licensing restrictions, which forces one to respect very precise rules about using these formats. And for evident reasons, we think that this kind of approach does not allow for an expansion of the use of this kind of formats. So again, the approach is well documented, it is free. The implementation, of course, is proprietary, as it is the result of many years of development work at LexiFi. We are also sometimes asked what we want to do or how we want to work with newer technologies like blockchain or artificial intelligence. So about blockchain, we have of course looked at this technology. We have done some pilot projects with some companies proposing some blockchains. It is of course easy to put on the blockchain some, I would say, proprietary proof for holding a given unit of a given contract. However, if you want to manage on the blockchain structured products, things become much more complex. If you want to implement an automatic contract on the blockchain, you need, of course, what is called an oracle, which is something that provides you in an irrefutable way market data, fixings, and things like that, which does not exist today and which would make a fully automated lifecycle management on the blockchain of a non-trivial structured product very difficult. There is no really technical difficulty. It's more a difficulty of available data. To be honest, none of our clients or prospects has never asked us for a solution on the blockchain. So this is something we are following. We are prepared to do, to work with the blockchain if this demand arises, but this is not the case today. Now about artificial intelligence. We are using it a little bit. We in particular have incorporated the use of artificial intelligence models in one of our products, more precisely in our, I would say, in our, what we call our PDF analyzer, which is some tool that takes an input, a fact sheet of a structured product, and which translates this fact sheet immediately into our contract payoff description. And here, if we cannot finish the job alone, we are trying to ask some artificial intelligence model to give us some answers. One should keep in mind that artificial intelligence, at least today, is typically a probabilistic approach, which ensures you that it works in 99% of all cases, but it doesn't give you a guarantee of perfect functionality. And in our market, we need perfect functionality. We need results that must be perfectly correct. A document must always be correct and not only in most of the cases. So our use of artificial intelligence is reduced, but we are of course following this precisely and will incorporate this technology more and more as it matures. We don't want to present LexiFi as a reg-tech. We are not living from the regulation, hoping that there is more and more regulation so that our clients are forced more and more to use our system. We understand that regulation is often socially necessary, even it, of course, it implies costs for our clients. The only thing we want to say about regulation is that we try to convince, and that's also the reason why we present in deep our technology, we try to convince our clients and prospects that we are well prepared to implement any new kind of functionality that would be imposed by some regulation. And that's exactly because, as usual, we have this unified generic contract description that allows us to implement immediately in a very generic and complete way any new regulation framework that would become necessary. And I take again as the example the PRIPS document necessity that we implemented once for all kind of structured products, and that became immediately available to all of our clients without even them noticing it in a big announcement. What about challenges and opportunities in expanding LexiFi in foreign markets outside of our usual markets here in Europe? So, a few simple answers to that. From the beginning on, our generic approach has been designed in such a way to be agnostic of the kind of underlyings and completely generic in the kind of payoffs. So, we are by construction compatible with everything, with every kind of structured product may it be popular in Asia, in the United States or in Europe. Of course, there are differences, there are cultural differences, there are institutional differences, there are many differences, but the technological building block will clearly be the same between all these different regions. By the way, one of our big clients is using our technology in the 3 continents. For institution or regulation reasons, he is separating it into using 3 different databases, but this client could regroup everything into one database, therefore sharing all the contract definitions between all the regions. In another direction, when we decided to enter the Asian market, it was of course well understood that we had to support accumulators and decumulators, which are structures that at this time were very popular in Asia. And so we simply had to add these 2 structures more precisely to map them into our unified payoff description language for having immediate, complete support of accumulators and decumulators in our system, which made it immediately compatible with the Asian market. So once again, there are of course difficulties. We have a sales force to build up. We have institutional or cultural differences between different countries. But from the technical point of view, nothing is a hurdle against expanding worldwide the use of LexiFi's technology. One last important question, of course, is how to attract talents and how to keep them at LexiFi. Of course, if we do not only consider the usual benefits and the usual quality of life that you can have at working at LexiFi, we may look a little bit further about what I think is a favorable working ambiance at LexiFi. And this is, of course, something which is very important also for our customers, because the service and the quality of the products that we deliver to them depends at first from the quality of people that are working at LexiFi. From all people, from engineers, from salespeople, from support, from marketing, and everything. So a few words about I would say, about some kind of spirit that we try to have at LexiFi. It's firstly that LexiFi is a company which is scientifically well-founded. We are working with scientific, rigorous tools, and so the communication is made easier by this kind of irrefutable tools and assertions. We try, of course, to be very rigorous, to be honest with ourselves. And let me come quickly back to this notion of having only one platform, like the car makers that use some platforms. The fact that we have only one platform is, of course, a technological quality, but it's also something that makes many, many things easier from an organizational point of view, because you don't have two departments which are in some sense competing to obtain more resources from the management of LexiFi. We have only one platform, and so everybody is working on the same platform, and so this makes many, many conflicts unnecessary or superfluous. We are transparent, meaning that we are open to critique. Myself also, if I do some error, if I introduce a bug in the software or whatever, I will be corrected by some people at LexiFi, and that's completely normal. And this is, I will recognize my error, of course. We have to be innovative. We must, I would say, cultivate a culture of honesty. And last but least, I would say that the technology that we are implementing, this unified contract representation language, enforces or implies much more, I would say, coordinated work between quants, the quantitative side, the mathematicians, and the IT integration, because all this is done much more in a unified way than it is often treated at most of our competitors.